Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Speaking as someone who was growing up during the end of the prequel years, it was very easy to just take for granted the number of incredible Star Wars games that were coming out on a regular basis. Looking back, it's ridiculous to think that in a single year, the original Battlefront 2, the first LEGO Star Wars, Republic Commando, the second Knights of the Old Republic, and the movie tie-in for Revenge of the Sith all released. Each and every one of those games is still talked about and looked back upon fondly to this day, and every single one came out in 2005, and to be honest, most of the years around that time had a similar lineup of memorable Star Wars titles. However, as anyone who has been following Star Wars in the past 7 years is well aware, the release of Star Wars games has slowed pretty dramatically. Shortly after acquiring the Star Wars franchise in 2012, Disney promptly canceled every Star Wars game currently in development, and by 2013 had signed a 10-year-long exclusive deal with Electronic Arts, giving them full control over all Star Wars games until the end of 2022, excluding LEGO games as they had a previous deal dating back before the buyout. Since then, EA has done very little with the license. In over 6 years, from 2013 to mid-2019, they released only 2 games, both entries in the rebooted DICE Battlefront series. Which brings us to today, and the recent release of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. For a long time, much of the Star Wars community was worried this game would never make it to release. I mean, EA is the publisher that just 2 years ago shut down Visceral Games entirely, and they were neck deep in development on a third-person open-world Star Wars experience, and EA had decided that a single-player experience wasn't what Star Wars fans would enjoy in the modern day. When asked why they shut down the project, EA CFO Blake Jorgensen famously said that linear single-player games are no longer in demand or appreciated by modern gamers, and followed up with what has to be the most EA quote I've ever heard, insisting that his motto is to cut the bridge when you realize you can't really make a lot of money on something.
First of all, congratulations,
Electronic Arts.
Hello, I like money.
Still, EA's attitude towards single-player adventures had many of us really worried about Fallen Order, myself included, and I'm very happy to say that that worry was completely misplaced. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is not only one of the best single-player games I've ever played, it is quite possibly my favorite news story set in the Star Wars universe since Disney took over. I was that invested in everything that was going on, and any talk from EA in regard to single-player games no longer being enjoyed by modern audiences is complete and utter garbage. The game is selling well and is a critical darling. As of recording, there isn't a single negative review on Metacritic. Respawn knocked this one out of the park, and that's what happens when EA just leaves their greedy hands out of it and lets a gaming studio make a game. Just as a fair warning, this video is not going to be spoiler-free starting right now, and in the interest of keeping this video structured, we'll be splitting it up into 3 sections: gameplay, story, and Darth Vader. Darth Vader just gets his own section of this entire video. That is how much I want to talk about that scene. Anyway, with that all out of the way, let's just kick this off. When I think of lightsaber combat done well, I think of Jedi Academy, Jedi Knight 2, and honestly the previously mentioned Revenge of the Sith movie tie-in, which I could make an entire video on. That game is so underrated. Still, all of those games are over a decade old. It's been a long time since a game has really done saber combat well. Jedi Fallen Order changes that with a combat system that is not only enjoyable, but one of the most rewarding learning curves of any game I've ever played. As I progressed through Fallen Order, starting out with only the most basic of attacks, I consistently found myself trying my absolute hardest to perfect the combat. I wanted to know how to time every attack, how to deplete stamina in the most efficient way possible, and I love getting creative with the ways in which I disposed of enemies. I'm also an extremely stubborn type of player, so during my first trip to Bogano, I refused to leave until the Ago Bogdo in the cave was defeated once and for all.
Anyone?
God, I love that.
What was so satisfying was when I returned to Pagano later on and had to fight 3 of these things at once. It was quite literally a walk in the park. I had focused so heavily on improving during the main story that I was able to take enemies out with ease. Even when I started up a new game without any of my force powers, I was able to take him out first try because you slowly and steadily improve your parry and attack timing, dodge and roll techniques, and all the while the game is consistently rewarding your progression with skill points, as well as new force powers that are handed out at just the right pace. I never felt as though things were getting stale, and I also never felt as though the game was throwing too many things at me at once. Somehow Respawn found the perfect balance, which is rare, extremely rare in my opinion. On a very consistent basis, I was discovering new things I didn't know I could do, like after deflecting one blaster bolt with the double-bladed lightsaber, Cal will just deflect everything back at enemies effortlessly, which makes for some incredibly cool moments. Never once during the 15 or so hours it took me to complete the main quest did I feel bored. In fact, I've never really been someone who can sit down and game for hours and hours on end. I generally have about a 2 to 3 hour limit, and then I need to do something different for a while. However, Jedi Fallen Order was locking me in for nearly double that every single session. I recorded the entire game in just 4 sittings, so I was averaging more like 4 hours every time I sat down to play. As far as challenge goes, Ogo Bogdo aside, I found it to be exactly what I was looking for on a narrative-driven first playthrough, although I will say I did play on Jedi Knight, the standard difficulty, and I do plan on giving it a second playthrough on Grandmaster in the coming weeks. I would say you already saw about half of my deaths. I was just so bad at first and Ogo Bogdo just messed me up, but once I figured out parrying and such, deaths were pretty rare. Most of the boss fights were engaging but not too difficult. The Ninth Sister got me once, and the final encounter with Trilla led to a few deaths, but other than those two, I believe I beat each of the bosses first try, including Malicos, who I found to be very easy. I've almost exclusively been praising the combat when it comes to gameplay, but what Fallen Order isn't getting enough credit for, in my opinion, are the puzzles. I found each and every one of the puzzles very engaging, and not a single one ever got frustrating. Each puzzle took me just the right amount of time to figure out where you still gave the game full credit for coming up with clever solutions, but none took so long where I started to get frustrated. Never once did I feel as though I had tried everything and needed to look up a guide. It was always process of elimination until the solution was found, which is exactly what I'm looking for when it comes to a puzzle-based challenge, and it heavily reminded me of the 2013 Tomb Raider, another one of my favorite single-player games. On a relatively unrelated note, I feel it would be a little dishonest to not let you all know I had one pretty embarrassing moment while trying to acquire a particular item I couldn't get to early on.
Come on, give me your best shot. I'll give you a free one. Let me have it.
When it comes to criticism of the gameplay, I really only have two. The first is something that may change on a higher difficulty, but from what I've seen, I don't think so, and it has to do with the AI. I would say 7 or 8 times throughout my playthrough, I would be slaughtering stormtroopers or other Imperial enemies in the direct line of sight of other Imperials, and they wouldn't react in any way, and I'm talking like maybe 20 feet away, but because I wasn't directly in their activation radius, I guess, they just wouldn't do anything. It wasn't something that happened often, so it wasn't a big deal, just something I noticed, and did take me out of it when it did happen. My second criticism is something that's been beat to death, so I won't spend much time on it, but there needs to be more options after you finish the game the first time. I see Respawn's point where if you were allowed to have all of your force powers from the very beginning, that would kind of break the flow of the game. I don't even know if they could make that make sense, but I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to start a second alternate playthrough with all of your cosmetics unlocked. I want to be able to play a game from the beginning with whatever lightsaber color and hilt I want, yet as of right now I can't, but who knows, I think there's a really high chance that changes soon. Respawn seems to be open to the idea. That's really it for gameplay related things I had an issue with, and only one of those things had an effect on my first playthrough. The second is just something I want for replayability's sake. I would love to see this same combat system used in DLC, or even another game entirely. That is how much I loved everything about it. However, while the gameplay was excellent, the story was something more. While While it's safe to say that I was thrilled with the gameplay Fallen Order had to offer, the narrative was what blew me away the most and struck a personal chord with me. What really hit me when the story wrapped up was that Fallen Order was almost entirely about a cast of characters who were starting over. Cal hides out on Braca for 5 years, riddled with the guilt of his master's death, something that really wasn't even his fault. Eventually, Cal overcomes this guilt, and his new lightsaber symbolizes him finally having the courage to move on, and we see Cal form bonds with what is essentially a new family. Cere is similarly damaged, although her guilt comes more from allowing herself to give in to the dark side, even if only for a moment. Trilla's fate also weighs heavily on her, and Cere feels that keeping the holocron out of the Empire's hands could be the beginning of a path to personal redemption. Grease is just a guy with a bad gambling habit and very few friends, yet by the end we see he's starting to realize what's really important. Merrin leaves behind Dathomir and joins the Mantis crew in the interest of a greater good and a fresh start. Even Trilla realizes her redemption is within grasp during her final moments, a realization that is cut tragically short. You know, I tried to just put together a personal list of my favorite characters, but I couldn't. I seriously loved every single character we met along the way, and the performances from each of the actors were phenomenal. Cameron Monaghan as Cal and Elizabeth Grolin as Trilla stood out to me in particular, but across the board, just great acting. The writing team behind the characters and the overarching plot are a team I want writing whatever the next biggest Star Wars video game adventure is. I don't know what it'll be, but they clearly have a love for the source material and a respect for what Star Wars can be and the potential it has. I would love to see the same team work on a game using previously existing characters. I can't even begin to imagine how incredible a game like Fallen Order would be if set during the Clone Wars. Both the Order 66 scene, and of course just swimming through the Venator wreckage on Zepho, and seeing all of the clone remnants, just made me want something new set during that era. And because of how this game has been received, I think we'll get it. I just hope the writing can reach the bar Fallen Order set. If I were only allowed to specifically pick out one thing I think the writers of Fallen Order need all the praise in the world for, it's the way they handled a certain returning character, which brings us to the most important section of today's video.
Nothing can stop my lightsaber.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Stay back!
Darth freaking Vader. Now, unfortunately, some asshole I won't name spoiled his surprise appearance in their thumbnail the morning of release, but it didn't take away from the way Vader was portrayed in the slightest. The way he makes an entrance by effortlessly doing away with Trilla, who had already proven herself to be an exceptionally skilled Inquisitor several times. Trilla doesn't even attempt to resist either. She knows challenging Vader is pointless, so she just gives up and accepts the inevitable. Vader proceeds to just toss Cere off the platform without a second thought, and this was when I started to get a little worried about how the game was going to handle the encounter. Cal may be on a path to become something more, but if the game was about to have me fight and possibly overpower Vader, I was not going to be happy with that. Luckily, the game does the opposite and something I didn't expect, and you are given no option to fight. You try to engage and you die. At one point, I tried to just look back at Vader while running away from him, and even look at him without blocking, and he just instantly kills you, even from 20 yards away. They made Vader feel overwhelmingly powerful, and it's crazy to think that during Fallen Order, he is 27 years old. That is a Vader in his prime, and that rage and anger is on full display during his brief appearance. Fallen Order was able to include Darth Vader, someone who is always a scene stealer whenever he shows up, without relying on him. Was it awesome to see Vader? Yeah, of course. But was everything around Vader also incredible? Undoubtedly yes. When he grabbed BD-1, I really thought Vader was going to crush him right then and there, and I honestly freaked out when I thought that was going to happen, because the writing had made me not only care about BD-1, but his and Cal's relationship. The thought of Vader destroying that got a real and visceral reaction out of me, something most games can't do with their story. But Jedi Fallen Order is not most games, and I'm happy to say it's a game that is right up there with my all-time favorites. In the future, I would appreciate EA not telling me what I want or what I would enjoy. Single-player games are still alive and well, and Fallen Order is undeniable proof. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like, and consider subscribing so you never miss a future upload. But with all that being said, I will see you in the next one. I have spoken.